Welcome back to another episode of The Apex. I'm Archie, and today I have the pleasure of chatting to Richard Attwood. Now, Richard raced in what is considered to be the golden era of motorsport. He raced single-seaters in Formula 1 and Formula 2 against the likes of Graham Hill, Jim Clark, John Surtees and Bruce McLaren. He was also part of the Ford GT40 development program, and he won Le Mans in 1970 driving a Porsche 917, and that was the first of Porsche's 19 overall victories at Le Mans. Before we begin, I also just want to say a massive thank you to Porsche Centre Wolverhampton for letting us host the interview here. It's rather fitting to interview Richard at this location, given his ties to the Porsche marque, but also Wolverhampton, because he was born and raised here. So without further ado, let's go and have a chat. Right, Richard, we're back for another one.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Well, the camera's there, obviously, yeah. Obviously we had a quick chat at Blenheim, but we've got a bit more time this time around. And there's a lot that I want to talk to you about, because you did race in my opinion, the greatest era of motorsport. And I know you feel a similar way. But I suppose to start with, how did your sort of journey into motorsport actually begin?
Well, it was my father's influence, really.
Okay.
And I mean, we had a fairly big garage set up in Wolverhampton here. And after the war, he went to all the major manufacturers in this country. And he asked if they wanted representation in Wolverhampton. They all said yes. And so he got Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar, Daimler, Standard, Triumph, Aston Martin, Honda, Rover, Land Rover, and probably Vauxhall Bedford. And that's, you know, everything about except British Leyland or British BMC as it was then. Yeah. And Ford didn't do Ford. But I don't think it'd be quite difficult to do Ford out of Vauxhall anyway. So I was steeped in all those cars growing up and being passenger in wonderful stuff from the 50s. And Astons were my favourite, I suppose. I've got an Aston DB24 Mark.
Oh, lovely.
But it's being done at the moment. It started really. I mean, boys generally like cars, as I say you do, and I was no different. And I learnt to drive at a very young age on a farm. So, I don't know what. It's just as things unfolded, you know. And I always remember I had a careers person came round at public school I was at, and said when I was about 15 or 16. Well, what do you want to do in life? Oh, of course, I haven't got a bloody clue. I mean, I thought, and I suppose lots of people, maybe young kids, and maybe today, they know what they're going to do from day one. But I said, I didn't say I want to be a racing driver, I think it's daft like that. But it was obviously a profession I was looking for, and I just didn't know one and that I wanted to do. And so that sort of set me thinking a bit, I suppose. But really, I still didn't know. After another year or so, it wasn't clear to me what was going to happen. But when I left public school, I went to do an apprenticeship at Jaguar Cars, which was arranged by my father. My elder brother had gone to Rolls-Royce for an apprenticeship. I think apprenticeships are fantastic. And when I first went to Jaguars, I thought a bit like going to school there, because you've got to clock on and you've got to do everything regimented. And of course, gone from public school where everybody talks quite correctly and nicely and everything else, to the shop floor where every other word began with a letter that you know. And I just couldn't, I was quite in shock, really. And what also shocked me was that they'd all got cars, because they were earning good money. And that was another thing, because I thought only really, rich people could have cars, because having dealt with people here with the cars, sort of cars I mentioned, it was quite something to actually, I think, be able to possess a car and run it. So that was another thing that struck me. But then they started, I started my competition-ish thing in my little standard 10 there on the Jaguar car parks doing driving tests and that sort of thing. Yeah. And really I found I was quite good, and I won a few things, and that was the start of it, really. Yeah. But But well, I suppose really we're getting around to circuit racing, and for some reason I can never remember, but I wanted to do a race pretty much on my own, I think it was, and with my little standard, because we've got twin carbs on it, so it wasn't a normal car, but it do about 65, maybe 70, or maybe a bit more if you're going downhill. And
the wind behind you.
Lots of that. And so why I decided to go to Goodwood, which is about the furthest circuit from here.
Yeah.
I again have no idea. But before you could compete there, you had to go on like a proficiency test. And so I drove all the way down there. Of course, no motorways, so it took me a long time. It was certainly 7 hours. It might have been a bit longer than that to get there. Go through all the towns and villages because no motorway, all bypass and everything. And so quite something to have got there. And of course, when I was young, I drove like an idiot, really, because it'd been like a lot of young people do, although I shouldn't admit that now. And so you'd think I was worn out, but I was really quite looking forward to what I was going to do, although I didn't know what I was going to have to do anyway. And so I got there and I signed on, or whatever you do. I mean, I don't know how I made my way there. And I had no idea what I was doing. They said, right, they said to me, we've got to go out and we're going to just have a look at you driving, going around for about 3/4 of an hour. I thought it was quite a lot of concentration there. And the circuit didn't, I didn't find anything completely daunting. What did worry me as to how to progress, or how fast, or and what they're looking for is speed with safety and no raggedness. And the spin would probably say, well, when you've calmed down a bit, you have to go again. Yeah. Which I really didn't want to go put on that trip again. And so at the end of the 45 minutes, I came in, flagged off, and I don't know if I had a race number on the car or not, but they knew who was whatever car, how long it'd been out there. Yeah. And they called me in, and so anyway, they said, no, that's fine, if it's okay, you can compete. Well, that's the first thing I'd ever done. And, and I thought, blimey, that's amazing. I thought, gosh, I've actually passed a test. I mean, I've not been a normal test. Yeah. And so really, within that same year, 59 it was, and I went down to do a race as a members meeting. I don't know what number it was, but it was certainly a members meeting run by the BARC. And I have no idea where I finished. I had what I thought was quite good fun with mixing it with other people, and it was my first experience in competition, and really found it quite. It came to me quite normally, naturally, I suppose, in many ways. Yeah. So that was my first race, and to prove it, there's in Autosport that particular week was a picture of me in the car, and my car. No idea why, I wasn't anybody, and it just said sideways. Well, I did look very sideways. It said sideways, go sideways after it is standard 10. Well, I've no idea why. I mean, I didn't pay anybody for it. So I competed my first event, and it went from there. Yeah. And my father then provided something a bit more potent, and it was a TR3A. Okay. Yeah. And my brother also had a TR3A because of standard Triumph dealers. So probably down as a couple of demonstrators. And I went to next year, 1960. I did a whole race, series of national races in 1960 with the TR. And it wasn't modified in any way other than the spokes and wheels. I put more spokes in case it broke. And that was it, really. That was a standard TR3A. So I went to Mallory Park, and that's, I think, probably my first real race. But, and for this car, it's quite this would do 100 mile an hour, this car. So I thought, bloody hell, it's a bit different to the old standard term, waiting for the wind up with the gears and change up. And so I was entered into 2 races that day. One was a handicap race, and the other one was a scratch race. And I used to be late in those days, and I was late at Mallory, and you can't get into the circuit without the circuit stopping. And then you let it through, and then by which time I'd missed my my definitive scratch race practice had happened. So I started at the back of the grid because I practiced for that particular race. But the handicap, I was just as a handicap. You set off at different times, and you're all meant to finish at the finish post at the same time, which never happens. And so that came first, handicap race, and I won that, but I only just won it apparently, because Dr. Tony Goodwood, he Chris is his son. He's quite big in Bugatti fame. No, not Bugatti. Who's he with? I don't know who he's with. Chris Goodwood. Anyway, he does a lot of testing and stuff, and he's good at Goodwood as well. Anyway, his father, he was apparently overtook him on the last lap, but I never knew that until only literally, I don't know, within the last half dozen years. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know. But I knew I'd won it.
Yeah.
So at Mallory, you can see quite a long circuit from the paddock area there, if you've been there.
I haven't actually been there.
And you can see the straight and the rest and everything else. And so some of the guys in the scratch race came to look at the car. And they said, oh, it's a nice car you got there. I said, well, it should be. It's brand new. And they said, well, what have you done to it? I said, well, nothing to it. It was just a standard road car. I said, oh, I got the extra spokes in the wheel, 60-spoke wheels instead of 48. They said, oh, okay. And, I said, I've also got the 2.2, which was an upgrade with the cylinder, the liners, wet liners. And so that was a 2.0, well, it was 2.136, I think. So not really 2.2, but anyway. And they said, no, we've got all that. Well, what else have you done? I said, nothing. And I was beginning to I'm not very the hardest intelligent guy, but I thought, well, it must be, I don't know what. So anyway, they'd seen something that I didn't know about. So. And they'd seen it, why they got an eye on me, I have no idea. But anyway, I saw this light blue thing going quite well. And so anyway, scratch race comes up. I start on the back. And I get to probably about 10-lap race, as I had a game race as well. And so we get probably a couple of laps from the end, and I've just overtaken either for third place, or I think it was for third place. And I make a classic error by going into Gerrard's. I'm looking at the guy behind us out of the corner. I miss the turn in, so I hoik it in and lose control effectively. Go on the inside and biff the bank on the inside. So egg on face, and that was really first lesson learned, I suppose, the hard way. But my father had the foresight, maybe, to send me with a guy in another car, because we couldn't drive that car back. It was the wing was all bashed into the tyre and everything, so we couldn't move it. And we had to leave it there in the scrutineer and bay. I went home with an egg on face. And so my mother never wished me to race, and so she was waiting for us when we got back. And my guy, Don Buckingham, I was driving back, and as soon as we got home, he jumped out of the car and he said, he won. And I got out the other side. I said, no, I crashed, which he didn't want to hear at all. And so that was, I think, my first serious race, really, yeah. And then I went through the whole year with the standard car as it was. I didn't have time to modify it. But I was really enjoying the racing. I was learning a lot all the time. Yeah. And it's probably the most enjoyable year of racing I've ever had, I would say, because nothing was really at stake. And there was no money, or I didn't have to do it if I didn't want to, although I did. And so at the end of that year, I went to my father and said, "Oh, well, actually, I want to modify this car so I can go back and beat all the guys beating me," because my average finish was about 4th, and and I wanted to be able to go beyond that.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we're not going to bother with that. I'm going to get you Formula Junior." Well, I didn't really know what a Formula Junior was. That's how it was. So he was obviously out to see how it went for me. Yeah. And obviously could see I was really enjoying it. And he was my sponsor. Without him, I wouldn't have done anything at all, I can assure you. I don't think, anyway. Who knows? But I don't think so. And so I then did 3 years of Formula Junior and ended up with winning that race in '63 at Monte Carlo, which was the biggest race of the year. Yeah. And that put me on the map. And I did all my apprenticeship really in those years. Yeah. And won the most promising driver for that year.
Yeah, it was the Goodwood Award, isn't it?
It was the Goodwood Award, yes. Yeah. And that's the forerunner of what happens today.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it went from there. And then I didn't. He then asked me, just to complete the story, then my father asked me he said, "Well, you've done well, you've learned your colours," type of thing. And he said, "I want you to come and join the business and help me run the business." And I said, "Yeah, but, I just got a couple of contracts." And so I was actually turning pro. I didn't probably realise it at the time, but I was. Yeah. And he realised he'd let me go too far, which was his own fault, not me. Yeah. And he sort of, stepped back, and that was the end of that from him. Okay. But I said, I will join him, which I did. And this was '63, so I did in '71, but by then it was much later than he wanted. And it really wouldn't have worked, me working with my father, because he couldn't work with his father.
Oh, okay.
And my grandfather started the business in Stafford, and my father, I think, had to step away. I think he was probably given a loan of money to set up somewhere else, because they couldn't work. They were loggerheads all the time. And so he started in Wolverhampton, and they went to Walsall and other areas in the area. Yeah. And we were quite big for the area anyway. Yeah. And that's really the beginning.
Yeah. And so was it that sort of, the win at Monaco in '63 and then winning the Goodwood Award? Was that kind of the moment when you were like, "Oh, I can actually make a career out of this"?
No, not really. Okay. I just taking every step as it came up. Okay. It was it just happened to go that way. Yeah. I wasn't thinking I was going to be a professional driver necessarily, but offers did come in, and it was a different era to what it is now, completely. Yeah. And there were some drivers who bought drives even then. Even then, yeah. But they wanted the glamour and the glory of doing it without actually. So they would borrow, one of Chapman's Lotuses or something like that. Yeah. But it's. It's just as night follows day type of thing. I didn't make any plans. I wasn't going to say I'm going to be world champion or anything like that. I didn't have any real ambitions, but I just wanted to do well. Yeah. And I enjoyed it more because I was then self-sufficient in monies. And, then you realise that you actually can do what you probably want to do, and I wouldn't want to do anything else at that time anyway. Yeah. And there's nothing really in my life in general that I would have changed to, I don't have regrets. I mean, I do, but then I think, well, if I'd got that drive somewhere, I just think, that it was a very dangerous time. Yeah. And that's why I did packed in early at 71. I was 31. And that was the reason I did stop, because lots of reasons. I got married and wanted to join help my father, I thought, and lots of things added up. That and I thought I'd been quite lucky at that point, and so I decided to. Well, that was it, really. Yeah.
And obviously those sort of 63, 64, the competition as well in single seaters with the other drivers as well. I mean, this was for example, I think in Formula 2 race you did at the Powell Grand Prix, I think you came second to Jim Clark.
Yeah.
And like, from my growing up, obviously I read about him, watched documentaries on him, and I get the impression that he was kind of like the driver's driver. And I'm wondering sort of, did you see him like that? And what were your experiences of him like?
He was just an amazing driver. Nobody was... It's a bit like Sterling, really, who was my idol, and I did write to him about my standard turn to make it faster, and I did get a reply. But he was just... I didn't race against Sterling because he had his accident in '62, and I hadn't really started in international races, in Formula 2 particularly, but Formula 2 we did with Jim Clark and all the graded drivers, as they call them, at '64. And but the race at Pau, the first year, we were still running the old car because Eric Broadley hadn't made the new Monaco car, so we were always a bit behind. And but Jim Clark had the latest Chapman's. And Chapman every year was bang on. Brand new guy. He was a commercial guy, and he was out to sell cars, which of course he did very well. He sold probably more than anybody else, certainly at that time. And they were all good. In junior years, the 18, the 20, and 22, and 27, they were the best cars that you could have, really. He was Colin did it really thoroughly and well.
And it seems that sort of Monaco as well was a track that you particularly liked. I think was it 68 that you came second to Graham Hill?
Yes.
And then it was 2 seconds behind him or something. It was very close.
Yeah. And but he measured that. I mean, he could have. I didn't realise he was winning the race at the slowest speed, really.
Right. Okay.
Because it was Lotus 49. Yeah. With the most amazing engine, DFE. And we had, in the BRM, I had a V12. Sounds wonderful, but it wasn't really, because it was a sports car engine. Because the H16 was meant to be the Grand Prix engine, completely failed. And eventually they made that into a 4-valve engine, but this was a 2-valve engine. It was just, it was a nice car, but it was just, until I drove the Lotus 49 the next year in '69. Yeah. As soon as I drove it, I hadn't even done a lap, and it was a completely different car. Yeah. It was completely alive and responsive and just amazing. Yeah. And I realised how far away I would have been if Graham had wanted to. He could have possibly, I don't know, lapped me. He might have done. Thank you. And... the realisation didn't come until I drove it the following year. And I thought, well, I've done really quite well, but really it was no chance. No chance at all, as has been proved. It's 155 Grand Prix, so I don't think any other engine will ever do that. So that was the right engine. But was there? But I had experienced it in the F3L.
Right. Okay.
In '68, and I just knew what that was like. That was a sports car, much more bodywork, and it was, but it was still, like shit off a shovel, I think. And but in the single seat, of course, even faster. And it was just amazing. It was light years ahead of it, I think, which has been proved. Yeah. And was there a sort of good chemistry at that time between the drivers as well? Did you all sort of oh god,
you all got on very well?
Stayed in the same hotels.
Okay,
meals together and everything. Okay, And Jim Clark came to Wolverhampton quite a lot.
Oh, did he? Oh,
yes, because he had a girlfriend called Sally Stokes.
Okay,
who was they were quite a big industrialist in some way, Anyway, he was going out with Sally, I think, even 1962, might have been 61, I'm not sure. But we had the Midland Racing Partnership, MRP. We put on a party in '63, and Jim Clark came to that because we knew Warhunter very well, and so I knew him on a personal basis, and he was just an ordinary guy, and he didn't know or have any knowledge of why he was so fast, but he was.
Right.
And he was usually in a gear higher than everybody else as well, so he was taking less out of the car. He was just an amazing guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
Mm.
And do you think it was just his sort of smooth, that's always attributed to?
Well, yeah, but I mean, we all try to do that, I
Yeah.
suppose, in a way, although obviously not everybody, but that's what I concentrated on as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all did for our, you couldn't be too ragged in cars like that, because if you crashed, you've got a very good chance of certainly severely injuring yourself or worse.
Yeah.
So, but he's just a total natural.
Yeah.
And I say it's over the years, really, you think of what he did, but the H16 engine, which I'd mentioned, the BRM never won anything that year with those engines. I mean, they all broke, but Jim Clark actually, Colin put one of those H16s in the back of a Lotus.
Right.
And Jim won I think it was the American Grand Prix.
Yeah.
With that engine. Yeah. I mean, he did, but nobody else did.
No.
And it just shows many things like that. They just, I don't know, a feel, a touch, a sensation.
Mm.
And he was running out of oil in some races, so he'd coast through the corners and then get the engine going. I mean, he's just, I don't know, nobody told him what to do.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's like an artist behind the wheel. Almost,
yeah. Artistry was absolutely the right word. Yeah. And, in Formula 2, when we got to Formula 2, where we got lots of really quick drivers now, and the idea was to combine that formula with the young drivers, like the junior drivers come in, and then compare themselves competing with the much more experienced drivers, which was a good idea. So in '65, when I was in a 3-year-old Lotus 25, which was probably a mistake, but anyway.
Yeah.
I was in '65. I was in Formula 1 and Formula 2, and we were just together, all of us, all together, all the time. I mean, there's just no differentiation. People then got helicopters and flew off everywhere. I mean, Jim did have a plane, and Jack Bramwell, I think, was probably the first one to have a plane. I'm not sure. And Graham got a plane, and they all started getting planes, but helicopters weren't that good then, I think. No. And he was a man of the moment, Jim Clark.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
And then obviously you also alongside the single seater. I suppose actually, looking back on the single seater, did you enjoy racing the single seaters? Was that something you did? Yeah,
really I think you're more at one with the car. You're right in the middle, and you see the wheels go around, which is a bit off-putting sometimes. But no, it is the ultimate, isn't it? And Formula 1 certainly was then, and it is now seemingly still the ultimate that everybody looks up to. Formula 1 as it's got the name, hasn't it, if nothing else? Yeah. But it's, in a way, sports car drivers in World Endurance Championship, WEC, I think those drivers drive harder than Grand Prix drivers. Right. Because you see the qualifying times for Formula 1, and then they start racing and they're not doing anything like that time. Yeah. And it's... I'm a purist, I suppose. So I shouldn't really talk about that.
But obviously, on the sports car side, obviously, I feel like the race that is often most attributed to you is obviously your win at Le Mans in 1970 with Hans Hermann in the 917. But from my understanding, that wasn't a race that you would particularly expected to win. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
It was like terrible conditions and...
No, it wasn't that. I mean, it was that, but it wasn't that. Okay. Before the race started, I said, I told my wife that we have no chance in this race. Right. Because I'd chosen it actually begins the year before, 69, because I drove the long tail, the first car, the first 917, which was totally unstable at any sort of speeds above approaching 200, and probably around 180. You know, you could feel the car was off the ground, and there's a saying that it's a square of the speed of speed, and every mile an hour makes a difference. And we were doing well. The car was capable of doing 235. And I don't think any car had been anywhere near that speed before. I don't know what the 7-litre Fords did, but they were built a bit like a brick, and I don't believe they'd have a horrendously high speed, top speed, but 235. But we were chunking tyres as well, because the tyres weren't, they were standard Dunlop type raised tyres, but big ones.
Yeah.
And they were, so we had to back off a little bit, which actually only knocked about 10%, 10 mph off it, which wasn't much. And it didn't really make much difference, because to give you an example of the stability, there's a kink at the end of the Bolton Straight. And any car I've ever driven, ever, except 1969, it was flat. And it was an easy flat. It wasn't flat. It was just steer it through flat. And this car, you could not. You had to back off. You had to brake. You had to set the car up with a bit of a lean on it. It was a nightmare to drive, which is why I didn't want a long tail in 1970.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I'm coming to.
Yeah.
And so, and the gearbox actually ultimately broke on that car in 69. And so for some reason, the factory rang me in about February time, and they said, Richard, we'd like you to drive one of our cars to the Bolton. Thank you very much. Yeah. And they said, well, we'd like to ask you what configuration of car you want, which is, I thought was amazing. And I think, but really, I think in 69, what they thought, I was completely, we got 3 hours to go, and we were 6 laps in the lead. Now, why didn't somebody tell us that, you could start pocketing it down a bit, But we had no orders like that at all.
Right.
And I don't understand that. I still can't understand why. Yeah. And then when the gearbox broke, I was, after the first stint of 69, Vic Elford did the first start, so he did a double stint, and then I did a double stint. Yeah. And I wasn't used to the amount of power this car had got, the speed of it. It had got, I don't know, maybe nearly 600 or something, maybe it was 600, I don't know what it was. But after my double stint, I'd got, I'm already resting my helmet on the rear bulkhead because my neck was going. Yeah. And on that early car, they had 2 exhausts out the side under the doors of the car, and the other 2 out the back. Yeah. And they changed that later on. So the noise, I'd got a blinding headache, and I thought after 2 hours, well, it was about 50 minutes of session, I think, that I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this, but you do. You just. And I went through a lot of pain in that race, a lot of pain. And when it broke, I was totally wasted, but I was totally, completely relieved that I still had my life. Yeah. I was completely finished. Yeah. And I think they saw that as disappointment, but it actually wasn't at all. I couldn't have given a monkeys about the race. Right. And I do mean that. Yeah. And I hadn't won it. And so we come to 1970 now, and I've ordered a short tail.
Yeah.
Smaller engine, because I want to break the gearbox.
Okay.
And one other thing, I said, I want Hans Hermann to drive with me. I said, okay. So that was set in stone. That was in February. So by June, we'd done a few races, and now the new 5-litre engine was a stonker. Had loads more torque and everything else. And it was much easier to drive because it sounds daft, but it was.
Yeah.
And so we do the qualifying, and I think we're 15th on the grid. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've done a really stupid thing. Because in my own mind, I'm thinking 14 other cars are faster than us.
Yeah.
Some of them were also 4.5 litre engines, but they were driving them faster. But the mod wasn't a race where you drive fast, because if you drove too fast, then you're going to break the car.
Yeah.
Which probably happened in '69. And so I said to my wife, Veronica, I said, we have no chance. I said, got to wait for 14 cars, all good drivers, and they were. You look at the grid and you think, bloody hell. And but they all suffered some sort of malaise. Some of them were driver errors. Right. And the conditions did get difficult, but actually by the time of the major rain, I think all the front runners were gone. And I couldn't. After 10 hours, I came in, and they said, "You're in the lead." Well, I just couldn't understand that at all. But of course, you don't see all the retirements, and you're not always out there anyway. You're having your breaks, so you don't see it on the other retirement. And I just said, "It's just insane." And so then the most difficult part, I think, is you're then defending a lead for now more than half of the race. You've only done 10 hours, you've done 14 hours, and the conditions got really, really seriously bad, where you think, gosh, I might as well come in, because we're just not making a lot of progress here. Anyway, that was the most difficult part of the race. And concentration levels. I mean, at any moment the car could let go, because aquaplane had gotten as well. So you have to drive according to the conditions. And people ask me sometimes, well, what's it like driving down the Bolsard Straight at 200 plus miles an hour? I said, well, in the rain light we had, you don't drive at 200 miles an hour. But it's So really, yes. I mean, apparently there were 3 Ferraris went off in one accident. Right. Because one of the drivers going through, I learned more and more about stories, and read back again, but coming out of White House, what I thought was the most fantastic corner, just before the pits. And one of the Ferraris had got muck on its screen, and he'd put the wipers on, and then he couldn't see anything. Oh, right. So 2 other Ferraris coming out when they just piled into each other. So that was 3 out of 1 accident. It's everything. Lots of things like that happen, and it's just, it's the difficulty was the second part of the race, not the early bit. Right. Well, we couldn't do anything about it, and the reason why we were so slow, because in '69 we had a 5-speed box, and in '70 we had a 4-speed box, and we weren't allowed to use first gear, because we want to protect the gearbox. Right. And I guess they'd strengthened the gearbox, but I don't really know that was a fact or not. I don't know. But anyway, the problem we had was we had to use second at Bolzano and our large corners. Well, the torque of the 5 litres would just walk away from us there. If they got 4-speed boxes, which I presume they had. And the long-tail cars were 30 miles an hour faster as well. So we couldn't possibly drive any differently, And a lot of people probably think, well, we sat back and we just waited for others to fall apart. No, No, we were driving sensibly and quickly, but not risking anything. And you know, we ended up winning it. I mean, it's just it was a crazy race. I think the fewest finishes on record. I think, but it's just mad.
Yeah,
the whole thing was mad.
Yeah. And when obviously you won, did you sort of? I suppose at that point you just glad it's over, or are you?
Well, I'd got I had mumps, which I didn't know about, which got me here, not down there. And I couldn't eat anything at all during the race. Anything with any taste went straight to glands. You know, it was horrible. I didn't really know what was wrong with me. Didn't find out till I got back home. Went to see the doctor here on the Tuesday. I didn't know because we didn't have medics. We didn't have anybody in massage or telling us what to eat. You know, you just have to do it yourself. Manage yourself. That was it. Whereas today it's completely different. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious what to do now. But for me, I don't know what they could have done for me anyway. I wouldn't know because if they try and deaden anything up here, then they might deaden things up here. So I don't know. But so I was again wiped out at the end of the race, and we went. At short notice in 1970, they wanted to have a victory celebration dinner at, I don't know where it was. Anyway, we had to get there, so we got there. Veronica and I, we went. I don't know, I can't remember how I got there. Anyway, after about 20 minutes, I just could not stay awake. And we left. So that's how I felt.
That's
So there was no big, big celebration.
No.
I mean, they did a celebration on the back of a truck. And there was a picture of me and the champagne and everything else. There's probably still a bit of adrenaline running through my veins at that time, but that evening I just we had to go.
Shattered.
So that was it. So I mean, I was worn out because of things I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought it was just I'm a wimp, you know, but it wasn't that I was a wimp at all. And then in 71, I drove the third car for John Wire, and John and I got on very well. And when he wanted a spare driver, he used to ring me up. And I was driving with a guy called Herbert Muller. And Herbie Miller was a crew cut Swiss, and he was a wild child, really.
Okay,
Because we did the filming at Le Mans straight after the 1970 win.
Okay.
At the Solar Village was inside the circuit, and they built a route to it to get to it from the normal roads, and there was a hairpin bend where you had to go quite slowly, otherwise. So, and anyway, Herbert Muller during the filming, he was always racing. A lot of racing, I was racing around everywhere. I never raced anywhere. I'm just so slow on the road. I really am. I'm not fast at all. I just set off early, and I get there when I get there, and everything's wonderful. But he had quite a big off on this hairpin turn, which doesn't surprise me at all. And I knew about that. That was the year before. And actually the American crew, they named that corner the Mueller chicane, which I thought was fantastic. But anyway, so I knew what I got, but I was driving with Herbie Muller. I thought, sure, well, so I gave Herbie a big pep talk for, over dinners and this and that before the race. And actually, in the race, he drove exactly perfectly. He really did.
Yeah.
And we were doing well, and it was between our car, the Golf car, and the Martini car. We were in car number 19, which is a car I raced at the Classic Le Mans, which Roll Goat has got, and the 22. I think Porsche have got a car now. I'm not sure, the white one. Anyway, we had a gearbox problem in the middle of the night in our car, And it was something that John Horsman and John Wyatt mentioned, that by pinning the gears or the cones or something with the steel pins would have made it bulletproof. But the factory relied on this glue, and the glue didn't, I don't know why, not before or after, but just this race. It happened, and I didn't stop the gearbox, but I think it's prevented us from changing gear.
Right.
So we had to make a pit stop. And it took about 45 minutes to change it. And because you couldn't just change the gearbox, you have to change the internals. Some years you could change the whole gearbox. Audi used to, in the later years, used to have the whole of the back end of a car. If they had a gearbox, they just took the back half of the car off and put another one on and carried on. So it does depend on the regulations, what you're allowed or not to do. And then ultimately the winning car came in, and they had exactly the same problem, only about an hour later, something like that. And they now knew exactly what to do. And they got buckets of water ready to chuck all the gears. And they did it in about 20, 25 minutes.
Right.
And we lost the race by only 5 minutes. So, as I say, the one race I knew we weren't going to win was 1970. Yeah. Because we just weren't fast enough. But,
And obviously, you drove like you said, the early iterations of the 917 in 69, and so you were kind of familiar with the development process of these racing cars. And I know you were involved in the development process of the GT40. Is that in sort of...
not much.
Not, okay.
Yeah.
So, because obviously there's a film that came out a few years ago, Ford versus Ferrari, with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. There's a lot in there about Ken Miles. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Did you ever meet Ken Miles? Did you?
No. No, he was a Brummie, and he wasn't far from.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I think he must have gone to America in the early 60s, I would say, but I don't know that.
Okay. Yeah.
But the 7-litre cars came on. Well, he was in a 7-litre car. Did he drive before the other American GT40s or one? I don't know. Before the 7 litres came in 66, didn't they? They won in 66 and 67 with the 7 litre cars.
Right.
But whether he was over before that, but I never met him. No.
Oh, okay.
And I think he would be in America before that period.
Yeah.
To do the work he was doing, because there was a lot of development. Yeah. So I would say he got to maybe in America from England.
Yeah.
Probably in 62, 63 or 64, I would guess.
So what was your involvement in it? Because you did drive some of the early iterations of that car, didn't you? Yeah.
I did. But I didn't do a lot of the development.
Okay.
This is 1964 now.
Yeah.
And it was a development from the Lola GT car, Eric Broadley's brilliant design. I don't know if you ever saw one of those Lola mark. I don't know what mark it is.
I can't remember.
6,
I think
6.
I'm not sure. I think
Anyway, his Ford engine, Lola GT, was. I have driven one at the Festival of Speed must be nearly 20 years ago. Maybe it was 20 years ago, and it was so small. It was unbelievable, and a pretty car too. It was a very advanced car, and I don't know how similar the GT40 was to that. I don't think. The GT40 had a big steel tub, and I don't think the Lola was made like that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But we didn't test the Lola GT before I got to Le Mans because it wasn't ready.
Right.
It wasn't ready until the day of the race, and it shouldn't have been entered in the race because it was late for scrutineering, but they allowed it in. And there were lots of dramas about that, but that's another story. But the GT40 I drove, I once went testing at... what's the test site there? Myra.
Right.
Myra, yes. And we weren't, I don't think we did any running on the banking circuit, the out circuit. And it was a very initial test. And it was probably just before the test day. They used to do the test days a couple of 3 weeks. Well, in April they used to do the test days and everything. And it was prior to this, I think. I didn't go on the test day with the car, but they wanted to make sure it was all right to do that test day.
Yeah.
So I went up with, we met at about 10 or something like that. And we were all finished by lunchtime, so we didn't do much. And basically all I got to do was do a couple of full-on starts to make sure the rubber donut things, but the half shafts were connected to, and make sure they were firm, big enough to take the torque of what we were doing.
Yeah.
Although we wouldn't be doing that at Le Mans, but it was just to test it out, and that was fine. And the other thing was bed small brakes in for the day that we've got to come up to, and the brake pads had to be burned in. You had to keep your foot on the brakes while you put an engine, full on engine brake. You had to burn them until they. And they were DS11 pads, which was the only way you could run them in.
Right.
Bentley. And and they weren't quite bedded in correctly. And John White came up to me and said, "Attwood, you're not brutal enough." But I think it was right. I think we got it right in the end.
Yeah.
But, I didn't do much because they had a lot of frontline drivers in the team, and they were using them with lots of experience.
Yeah.
Bruce McLaren would be one.
Yeah.
Phil Hill would be another one. I don't think Richard Ginter did much. But they had some better drivers, if you like, who have had more experience than I have.
Yeah.
And the reason, I don't know why I was included in the team, but it might have been my connection with Lola and Eric, and the fact it's a bit of carryover from the Lola GT. I don't know. But anyway, I got a drive in that.
Yeah.
But I think I got a contract with Ford of America as well.
Right.
Because I drove a Shelby Cobra at the Nürburgring only once, and it was the most awful car. Because the track was awful, that's why.
Right, okay.
And it was all down to the track.
Right.
And the track was very cambered in the middle of the road, so if you want to overtake someone, you've got to take some risk to go by someone at the Nürburgring the old time. And there were loads of, I remember I took off maybe 30 times a lap in that car. It was like a bucking Bronco. It was terrible, yeah. But I've driven a Cobra in modern times, and the car is fantastic now because the surface is fantastic. You've got ARBCO all the way around. You can hardly kill yourself now. Whereas if anybody went off in that track in the old days, you more than likely die because you'd hit something. But it's totally satisfying. And people call it the Green Hell, but to me it's not the Green Hell. They don't know what the Green Hell was. The Green Hell was when it was built in 1927.
Right,
I think. And it's been resurfaced many times since then. After Nicky Lauda's accident, of course. I don't know where we got to.
Well, I was just talking about sort of the GT40. But did you meet Carroll Shelby, or is it?
Yes,
you did.
Yes, I did.
Bit of a character.
Good. Only once really. Okay. I met him when we had drivers meetings. There was a Formula One drivers club type thing called the Ancien Pillars. They don't call it that now because they like the name Ancien. So it's a Formula One Grand Prix drivers club. I think it's called now. And I had met him on one or two occasions there, but I got to know him, well, the first time I met him was at the Nürburgring. He got 3 cars there. And they're all the silver blue colour, which was obviously denotes the 64 colours, because I think the year before, or one of the years before, they were black. Anyway, there were proper Shelby jobs, 3 there. Jochen Neerpasch was there. I think he was one of the drivers as well, but I was driving with Joe Slesser. And there were 2 quite long qualifying sessions before the 1,000-kilometre race. And on the first qualifying practice, I call it practice, one of the cars was destroyed. Shelby cars, finished. I couldn't do anything with it. It was mangled. I can't remember who it was. I thought they died, but they didn't die. Until, some years after, I thought somebody had died. And then the next qualifying before the race, another car was biffed, but they had to do a lot of work on it to get into the race.
Yeah.
And before the race, Carroll Shelby said he'd take 3 cars. He only got one good one left, really. And he said, please just finish the race. He didn't want any more aggravation. And I quite felt very sorry for him, actually. Anyway, Joe and I had driven before, and we got on really well because the French guy is a fantastic character. And we both drove it as we thought we should, and both similar. Yeah. And we won the class, and that's all Carroll really wanted. Okay. So he probably went away quite happy in the end, although it cost him quite a bit of money. But we were driving back to, we weren't staying near the Sport Hotel by the pit straight there. We were staying down in Aachen. Is it Aachen? I don't think it's Aachen, it's something else. Anyway, we were staying down there. And we were driving, we'd been at the garage, and I was driving back with Carroll Shelby driving me. And I knew the road going down there because I'd been there, I think previously I'd been staying also down this place. And I realised that he got his head so full of stuff. And I knew there was a hairpin bend coming up, which literally goes, like that. Yeah. And I didn't think he was really realising where he was. And I said, and as I said that, I don't know if he'd fallen asleep. He might have done, I don't know. And he put the brakes on because he obviously realised that something, should be doing something because I'd said something. And he managed to get it all gathered together. He apologised profusely to that girl, but I found said anything. We'd have gone flying off. God. Yeah, we would.
God. Goodness me, yeah. After everything, to go out like that. Goodness me.
Yeah, we'd have arrived at our hotel a bit quicker than we thought. No, it wasn't called Aachen. What was it called? Lost.
I'll find out.
Yeah, okay.
But and I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to talk about. Obviously, you said after you won Le Mans in '70, that's when you also filmed Le Mans. Yeah. And I've got my copy there. And that to me is like, if I could transport anywhere, like in time, to go back to the set of that film would be like heaven for me. And I guess I'd love to hear about sort of what almost a day in the life on the set of that film was like, because in my head, I just imagine, you're there with all your friends, all the races are there, you're shooting a film with Steve McQueen. I don't know if it gets much better than that.
Well, I know, you're absolutely right. But there were many days when we didn't do anything.
Right.
Because the light wasn't right, or I don't know what it was, but we always, and I'm still thinking today, I think some directors say they're all empowered to decide and all sort of thing. I don't know, but I mean, we were many days we didn't run, and that, but that was costing a lot of money to do that. And the film overran on time and on budget. I think the budget was $1 million, which in those days must have been a fortune. And it went 7 times that. I mean, it really was a disaster. And somebody told me, or brought it to my attention that, at the beginning of the film was Steve driving around the 911, and it's very scenic and wonderful. Yeah. Actually, it's quite a cult thing now. But and of course, the 911 has become so huge over time, and the fame of it and everything else. But there's not a word spoken for the first 43 minutes or something like that. Well, you find that's amazing in a film, isn't it? Can you think of another film where that could happen? Yeah,
there are. Yeah.
Are there?
2001: Space Odyssey, I think, is a very long opening, but that's like a sci-fi for a film like that. It is. Yeah, it's it's bizarre, but
but I can understand it because one of the famous directors, John Sturges. Yeah, he came on board to start with, and then And then Steve obviously had a falling out.
Yeah.
And then they had another one or two after that. And then the scriptwriter was in a similar vein.
Yeah.
And it actually, I can see why it didn't. I mean, the action shots were fantastic, and they were real. And I was in a lot of most of them. I didn't see many of them because there was a 908 car in the 1970 race, wasn't there, with Jonathan Williams driving with one of the factory testers. And they were filming shots of the actual race. And of course it was meant to be a Gulf winning race, wasn't it? Well, it wasn't, was it? The action shots I did with Mike Parts. He was in the 5-on-2 and I was in the race car 20, which was Steve's car, and Solar Productions owned that car. And that's the car I came to own later on in life through Brian Redmond. The action shots were really. He wanted it done at full pace. He didn't want the film speeding up or anything like that. And so we were really, hanging it out there really. And there was one shot where they wanted to pan the one car coming past the other car, and this car overtaking would hit a spring-loaded boom at a certain speed. Otherwise, if we went too fast, we wouldn't be able to drag it round. And it was hanging out the back of my car, and so Parts comes along and he knocks it down. The pan came absolutely correctly. Right, spot on first time, thank God. We're given a bit of extra money that day or 2 days, danger money. But that was much involvement, and that was good. But there were a lot of dead days, where they can't make their minds up what they're going to do next, but the weather's not right, but the weather's much less predictable now than it was then. And we were staying in chateaus, and it sounds very grand, and it was, but in the end, you want to try and get the job done. And Veronica would tell you that many days she came for a few weeks out there. And, for her, well, she didn't need to be there. She didn't want to be there. But we didn't suffer anything. We were well looked after. And looking back, I suppose when you look back on a lot of things, it actually was not that bad. But it seemed there was at the time. But he was intent on getting it right, and he did a lot of things that were quite dangerous. But he was, he was lying down in the middle of the road with us zooming past him and everything else. He just was a perfectionist. He wanted it so right. It's such a shame.
And you obviously spent a bit of time with him as well. And
we had dinner with him 2 or 3 times. And, he was just, again, an ordinary guy. And he really wanted to do what we did. And I suppose we wanted to be what he was. But there's only one Steve McQueen. There are loads of us. But he was in awe of us as well. Because he was quite a driver. He finished second at Sebring with Peter Revson. In 69, I think it was.
And there was actually one of the other races I wanted to ask you about was the Targa Florio. For me, that's obviously, again, you just hear stories of that race and these old photos of it and everything, and it, to me, has a certain allure about it, and the location and the sort of, do you have sort of fond memories of the Targa Florio? How did you sort of get on with that race?
Well, the first time we were going to do the Targa Florio for Porsche was in 69. And they'd chosen drivers from the year before with some trials and races.
Right.
And I was tested. It was all through Husker van Hanstein. And he was always good at spotting, talent and drivers looking for Porsche. Probably a Mercedes as well, I'm not sure. And so in '68, I drove, I think it was a 907 at Watkins Glen, 6-hour race. And I was driving with Tetsuya Kozawa.
Yeah.
And I can't understand why he didn't drive for the factory thereafter, but he didn't. And I didn't know why. And I don't think he did anything particularly wrong, but maybe it was his choice not to do that and do something else. I don't know. I never found out. And I met his daughter at Goodwood.
She was at Revival, wasn't she?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Last year I met her though.
Oh, okay.
And but I never, I don't know, it wasn't long enough to ask really. Yeah. But he's okay. He's around, isn't he?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. Right,
But he didn't come over. But anyway, it was always a mystery to me why he didn't join the club. But the Targa Florio was. We had a meeting at Stuttgart before the year started, and I hadn't done the Targa, and I knew it was a long track, and I thought learning the Nürburgring was bad enough, but then the Targa was something else.
Yeah.
And so I said, and the only question I asked was, well, actually, I've actually never been to the Targa, so I mean, I don't know, maybe you've got drivers who've been there, and so maybe we get somebody to do the Targa instead of place of me. And they said, Attwood, you will learn the Targa Florio. So, okay, I've got the order there. So just before we start the Targa itself, Brian had never been to the Targa either, Brian Redmond. So we both were sent off in, again, February. It was February. And we drove a couple of 911 hours.
Lovely, yeah.
Down there. We got 10 days. Well, it's a day to get there, a day to get back, so that's 8 days. Anyway, we drove down all through Italy and everywhere. Then we got the ferry, we got the other side, and Palermo, and we then got to find the track. And I said to before we set out, I said, are we going to take any spares with us, for the cars? And so, and said, why? Well, because I'll be used to British cars, No, the cars will be no problem. Anyway, they did. They put a set of brake pads in,
right,
which we didn't need, and a top of oil.
Okay.
Small can, which I've still got actually at home. And we didn't need that either. So, because the subs on the dry subs on the 900 are quite big, so we didn't need the oil either. So they were quite right, didn't need any spares. And but we were going down. I think we were pretty much wanting to get there as soon as we could, so we're going as fast as we could, but the cars were short geared because that's the 911 hours were short geared for hill climbing. And so we could only do about 105 miles an hour. And the engines were screaming their nuts off, about 7, 3 or 4. And we couldn't go any faster than that. So, and I'm sure, loads of cars were going by us. And they probably thought, why don't those bloody prats change to another gear? While they're screaming both of them. But that's the nature of the car, which was frustrating in a way. But and on certain atmospheric conditions, they would inlets would start frosting up, and then they started misfiring. Right. And we thought, shit, we don't know what's wrong with this thing. I told you something to go wrong with all the way down there. So we stopped at one of the rest places, and we lifted the bonnet, and you could see much more of the engine then. Yeah. And all this frozen stuff was around the carburetors. And or was it injection? 60? I think it would be injection, I'm sure, I guess. Anyway, we could see the inlet system was all, so of course we let the engine just heat it all down to water and off we go again. But we thought we got a problem, but we hadn't got a problem.
Yeah.
But just delays a bit more. But when we got into Sicily, we got no maps or anything of where the track was or where our hotel was. And but they said you'll find it from Palermo. You follow the way to probably Cefalo or something like that. And we just one of us spotted a tiny sign saying Targa Florio with an arrow just up to the right. And so we both stopped, turned around, come back and went up there. And we got to start-finish area. So we knew that was it.
Yeah.
But then we thought, well, what are we going to do? We've got 8 days. So the first day we'll just drive around, see how we're getting on. So actually, I think we followed each other around for the first lap. We did each in our cars, because if you're passengering, you don't really look. But if you're driving, you're probably more likely to take things in a bit more. So we drove around following each other around. But every now and again, we get to the road went that way, that we didn't know. So we had to wait for a fire and say, oh, of course, a Targa Florio, which way is it going? We had to do that 2 or 3 times. And after about, it must have been at least a couple of hours, I think, we get back to the start-finish line. And we opened the doors, we just collapsed on the floor with total laughter. There's absolutely no way we're going to learn that. I mean, it was a real uphill struggle to believe we could do that.
Yeah.
And I think the first day we drove round, I think we did 3 laps after that. And we got back home to the hotel and we had a debrief to ourselves. And we both really just driving around fairly aimlessly because you can't remember landmarks.
No.
So we then decided we'd have to learn it in sections. And we decided we're going to do it in 2-mile sections.
Right.
So we go up the road, concentrate like fury on the track, front start line, do the first bit first. After a couple of miles, stop, turn around, come back, switch brain off, then do it all again, repeat. So we did that for probably a couple of days. And then we were on about the 3rd or 4th lot of 2 miles. Then we realised we're not going to get through the whole circuit before we've got to come back.
Yeah.
So in the end, we learned it in thirds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did third,
Yeah.
back. So we did that. We did it that way. And I think Brian, because he'd done rallying, and I still think Brian has said that he doesn't, I think he said he didn't know it, but I thought, hand on heart, I did know it.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
And so this was in February, and then we go before the race starts in, was it May?
Yeah, I think it's around May.
Probably May.
Yeah.
And I get there, and so I go around a 914, I think, because they've taken one of those up because they want to test it out as well. So I'll just do another lap or 2 of that. And it seemed okay to me. And then I then give them the Muletta, a mule car, 908, but one that's not going to race. And it's much faster, a lot faster. And there was one section where there's, it's only soon after start, after about 4 or 5 miles. And it's a series of left, right, that's right. Left, right, another left, right, and then a left, and the right that goes on to straight.
Okay.
So the third one, it come out, obviously, with some good speed on. Well, I learned on my first lap that I came up to this bit that I've just described, and I mistook the second left, right.
Yeah.
For the final one. Well, how I avoided what I've got myself into, but it was a real heart-stopping moment, and it was so close to be smashing the car to pieces, probably myself as well. But what would happen was, and it's something that's probably somebody can quantify nowadays, but my brain had learned the track at a certain speed. And my brain couldn't keep up with the pace of this car now.
Ah, okay.
Because it was going so much faster. And it was all whirlwind stuff.
Right.
And that's when I really did build myself gradually up to speed. And we had the time to do that.
Yeah.
So it was okay.
Yeah.
And but I never know really what happened. Time-wise, it was all so chaotic, and I have no idea how well I was doing. But and you only, it's come to the pits once. There was a halfway point, but I don't think there needed any signals. There was nothing to tell us what we'd done. Yeah. So it was just your own judgment and instinct and safety and bring it home type of thing. Not on the back of a wagon. And but I was driving with Brian. And I think I was, anyway, he'd started, I think. Anyway, I was on my last stint, maybe it's the only stint, I can't remember. And I'm now coming in on my in lap, and I'm somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And I smooth this again. And there was one corner which was a bit of a left-hander, and to keep it on the road really, and if I'd known, of course I would have done, but which I had the space to do it. I could have brought it back, but I just sort of let it go up to the grass or the edge. And unbeknown to me, there was a rain gully there, and the suspensions were smashed down this rain gully in the races. Yeah, and that was the end of us. Right. So, and then of course the following year, Brian went off himself, and it was in very near the same area. If it wasn't the same corner, I thought it was the same corner, but I'm not sure if it was or not. But he had his fiery accident there.
And that's the one where you couldn't find, you weren't sure where he was, is that?
That's we couldn't find out where the hospital, which hospital he got to. Yeah, and he'd been taken off by helicopter. Right. There was no helicopter for me, but I suppose it wasn't needed. Or maybe there would have been one if I don't know. Yeah. But I wasn't injured, so it took ages to get back to the hotel. God. Yeah. But so Brian's had a big crash. He's caught fire. He's not burned. And he's gone to a hospital, loads of them. And so Pedro and I, we went to try and find him. And but we didn't know where to go. We went from one hospital, they took us obviously to another one. I think it was about a third or fourth one we came to. Oh, yes. So we found him, and it was all bandaged up. His whole face looked like an invisible man. And but Alan de Cadenet was in the same hospital. Oh, right. So obviously they knew which hospital they were going to take her to, but nobody could tell us. Yeah. And that's where the funny story about Alan helping Brian to have a pee. Because his hands were all, he couldn't do anything. There's a very famous thing, And Alan obviously obliged in whatever way. But it was necessary. Yeah. God. But he was I can't, well, his face was still bears the marks. Right. So he must have had 2 degrees. Or 3 degrees somewhere. Yeah. His hands were quite bad for quite a while. Yeah. But that was a bad one. He was lucky, really, I suppose. I don't know if it must have been caught fire getting out of the car, I guess. Yeah, because he was able to get himself out. Yeah, but yeah, those were the sort of days, sometimes you can't get out. Yeah.
And I suppose, it was an incredibly dangerous era. You lost a lot of your friends during that time. I'm just wondering, like, did that, being around that, sort of change your sort of outlook on life a little bit? Sort of, generally speak, like, I feel like being exposed to, near-death experiences quite often, did that change your perspective on how you sort of viewed life, I guess, and you stop and smell the roses a bit more? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think you did. You appreciated life, that's for sure. But you just, it's easy to say, but not necessarily easy to do. And there are the times when you might think, "Gosh, that was a close one," but you're in the game, and you just have to accept it. And you could probably slow down a little bit, but then you'll be slow, so then you won't get used anymore. So, if you knock 10 miles an hour off the straight, down the miles an hour straight, it's still going to be a huge accident. So I don't know. It's just, you just hope it never happened to you, really. And there are certain ways of driving that, I don't know. It's, I don't know. I don't know. You're conscious of it, but it's in the back of your mind. It's not on the forefront of your mind, and you get involved with what you're doing, and it seems to minimise the thought process of whatever else might happen. That
makes a lot of sense. Well, I think to finish up, I was actually going to ask you a few quick fire questions, which I've got here. These are a bit more, So I suppose single seaters or sports cars, if you had to choose between the two? Which one?
Well, today you're contracted really to Formula One, aren't you? Well, quite how Hulkenberg managed to get into a Porsche with it, I don't understand that. Why his clauses obviously didn't include. I don't know what happened there. There must have been agreement between two people, I guess. But that's how it is today. It's pretty restricted, and we would just drive anything at any time, anywhere, because you wanted the money to fill the weekends up to make a good salary for yourself at the end of the year. And I think it's more pure. A single seater is more pure, but really, when you're driving a sports car, it becomes the same thing, really. Driving Goodwood and you go through the chicane there, and if you're in a right-hand drive car, which most race cars are, but the Cobras aren't, you just adjust. It seems really at the end of the day, it's similar to a single-seater, so what the hell's the difference?
Who was the driver you most admired?
Well, Sterling was my boyhood dream, because he won so many races completely against the odds at the Nürburgring, particularly when Jack Fairman put it off the road, and he had to make up some unbelievable time to get back on, and he won the bloody race. Amazing. I mean, schoolboy hero stuff, isn't it? Really? Doesn't happen now.
No.
Although can do sometimes. But not like that. And his race, the Mille Miglia, I mean, that is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's the greatest motor race ever, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm quite certain of that. But sorry, what was your question about?
It was the driver that you most admired.
Yes. So Sterling, but I didn't race against him. But for me, I mean, obviously in my career, ultimately, it was Clark, without question. Well, no question of doubt about that. There were probably more exciting drivers, but he, whenever we were in single seaters, as a group of drivers, in the, let's say from 64 to 65, 66, 67, 68, you know, the question to your team was, well, what time did it do? And everybody else's, every other driver's next question would be, what's Jimmy done? Mm-hmm. Always. Also it was fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who do you think will win this year's F1 Drivers' Championship?
Well, I have to say it is getting more interesting.
Yes.
And if you think back of how long we've had to wait, it's 20, 25 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
Since we had the supremacy of
Schumacher, yeah.
Hamilton, Vettel. I mean, really, you look back at that and you think, I mean, Grand Prix racing was forever, maybe. I mean, watching racing, unless you've got somebody you're following, you know, you've got to have somebody to follow. And, you know, Senna was probably the last guy I would get out of bed for. And I did last in Australia. But it's, sometimes I don't even, I don't know. MotoGP is fantastic.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, you could see everything there.
Yeah.
And you know they're trying because they fall off. Yeah. So you know they're trying.
Yeah, yeah.
And how they have that feel. And I've never been a biker, but I've ridden bikes on the road, but they're just something else.
Yeah.
And it is a big wonder whether Marquez will be able to, probably not win it this year, but a factory bike, I don't know how much difference there is between a factory bike and a, you know, Yarrow bike. But things move on, and as he's still, I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see. Yeah. But that's MotoGP.
Yeah.
I mean, if McLaren can keep finding bits and pieces, then you could easily find both drivers in the team, as has happened before, or taking points off each other. So that's the problem as a journalist. It's a nice problem to have, but I don't know that it is really.
Yeah.
Because Piastri, when he knew where Norris was at the back of the grid, he knew that was his chance, and he took it with both hands, and he did.
Yeah,
he bloody did. It's almost like the car obviously isn't to Verstappen's liking at the moment. But I'm just wondering if it is the car, or he's been knocked off his perch somehow. I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. Because he was breezing it as he has done before. And it's a bit of a shock to the system, isn't it, really? I think if I was one, or if I was the driver who wanting to win it and with the best chance of winning it, it is still Verstappen because he's ahead. And Norris or anybody is going to have, you know, maybe one DNF, and Verstappen is second or third. It's going to be enough to knock the stuffing out of the other driver. I think. Not that it will, but mathematically it will. And so Verstappen does still have the aces up his sleeve if he could just hang it together. But there's an element of doubt now that wasn't there before. And funny things happen up here. And, you know, he's been, it's like a spoiled child in a way, isn't it? You know, because he's had the best toy, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And, you know, he's their own.
Yeah.
And he might have it deep in his thought that actually that bloody McLaren is better than my car.
Mm.
So, I don't know. But I'd still, my money would be on Verstappen.
Yeah.
But if somebody else wanted it, I think it'd be good for the sport.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
And final question, what is in your dream 3-car garage if you had to have 3 cars of your choice? What's going in there?
Money, no object.
Money, no object.
But also value of money, you know, when you've got them, no object either.
Yeah, exactly. Just the cars, yeah.
Well, I suppose I did have a 917, but I like a 917. Yeah, again. But that'll never happen, of course. Couldn't possibly happen for me. But going back to my past, if you like, with my father and the garages, and the favourite car that I loved as a teenager being driven by my father was the DB24. Yeah. And I've got one, and I've had it 60 years. So it's been there in the back of my mind all along. And about 4 years ago, I decided I should do something about it, because I thought it was going to get done in my next life, but I thought, no, that's not right. And I had bits all over the place, because I did start to rebuild it, and I rebuilt all the front suspension, and I did mostly the engine, I did the gearbox, and I did quite a lot of bits and pieces to it. But then I got married, and I still was doing it a little bit, and then I had kids, and I stopped doing it. And so I got bits everywhere, and I was looking for someone to do it, and we're just CMC, you know, the people in Bridgenorth, they're just down the road from me. The classic cars used to be classic motor cars.
Oh yes, I think I do that. Yeah.
They're only down the road, so I'd get them to come and have a look.
Yeah.
And I wanted the car to be taken apart, and put back together with all the usable parts, as many as possible. Even if it meant redoing it, costing money, to make it as original as possible, which is going to be. And they just wanted to. I mean, their signs were, you know, they'll take it apart, put it back together, you'll have a perfect car. Yeah, I didn't want that, and the cost was going to be ridiculous, which would make the car worth far less than the value of the bloody product. So then I went to about 4 people, and then I found this man down near Salisbury, and he's a one-man band, and he does everything except the bodywork. But he's got a bloke next door who does all the bodywork, and his name's Rob. And David Reed is the guy who's doing it, and he's done all the mechanical stuff already. He's done that, the chassis done, and the body is going to take time, and that's where they're probably, hopefully, more than halfway through. But it'll be exactly as it was. Okay. So that's the second car. Yeah. Or just cheap run around, really. I suppose. Like my wife's got a little Polo. So
oh, really? Oh, I've got a Polo GTI in the car park. I'll have to show you after.
Don't want any of that shit. No. It's a standard car. I think, you know, it's 1.2.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that can do 120 miles an hour?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. And it does everything. You don't need this GTI and knobs on turbo,
6-speed manual. It's good, nice size.
No, you don't do manual, do you? Do you know, when I worked for Porsche, which I don't do anymore, but when I was at the centre there, that PDK is just phenomenal, unbelievable. I mean, people talk about DSG. And GSG is good. Yeah. But it's nothing like a PDK.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And to not have that technology in your road car. Actually, the other car, if I'm not going to use any of them, but only for hire days and holidays, would be an early 911.
Okay, yeah.
An early 911, yeah, because that again takes me way back to when I was driving for them. And the first 911, the first 911 I ever drove, was it? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. It was a 69 car. Oh, beautiful. And 2 litre. Yeah. I thought it was the fastest car ever invented until I came up around Lake Geneva. I came up across a 300 SL. And it just disappeared away from me. I was absolutely shell-shocked. Yeah. But they were cracking little cars. Yeah. And they were quite difficult to handle. They're modified now to be perfectly handleable. Yeah. But in the early days, Porsche wouldn't make a car that they used to build understeer into the car because they knew drivers would get into trouble with it because it was not an easy car to drive, and it wasn't. Drive it fast, quickly. And they would have an understeer tendency, particularly in the wet. But it was a very satisfying car to get right. Yeah. But now they've I don't know what they've done to them, but they're nothing like. I've driven the car Porsche owned, the 911 there, but it's just as soon as you look at the corner, it's oversteer straight away. Yeah. But it used to be like you used to try and get rid of the understeer before you got the oversteer. Yeah.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting. It's lovely to hear the stories and everything. And I think it's important as well. Obviously, my generation, I didn't, I wasn't there, I didn't see it, so it's so nice to sort of hear about it. And it's really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you.
Okay, pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, you've run out of tape.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Apex. Wow, what an extraordinary man Richard is. It's a privilege to be able to talk to him and listen to his stories, and to chat to a guy from that ilk and era is incredible. Please drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to check out Custodian as well for your car-related needs, whether that's insurance or you're looking to buy a new car, check out the showroom. Thank you very, very much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, and he signed my DVD.